Hey, hello, I'm Kråkan, also known as Chronicles, and welcome to Yacc. Yet another Crowcast where I pick a game, I play it for a week, and then I'll talk about it. This week's game is Young Indiana Jones Chronicles for the NES. It was released in 1993, developed by Chris Gray Enterprises, I assume that's LucasArts, and published by Jellicoe. And also there will be spoilers up ahead just so you know, but first a little backstory. So I watch a lot of retro achievers on Twitch, and one of them is called That Family Games, also known as Paul, and he played this game and it looked kind of interesting. It's one of those games that I haven't played before, and just because it looked interesting, I was playing it this week, I guess. So as you boot up the game, you can select between two options, music on and off and cutscenes on and off, because this game has cutscenes and they're kind of nicely done actually. So as the game really starts, old Indiana Jones is telling a story about when he was young and going to Mexico during the Civil War. And by the way, that's a really bad idea. Don't go to a country that's on the brink of war. So the whole idea is that General Pancho Villa is waging war against the Americans and the Federals. And there's like a cutscene between Pancho and this woman not willing to join his revolution, which is quite understandable. So the first stage is set in Mexico, and you start with a whip, so you whip down revolutionaries, I guess. But you can also use other items such as guns, rifles, rocks, and knives. And some of these items, such as the rocks, I guess, and the knife has like an arc when you throw them, so you can push up and like be kind of like throwing the holy water in Castlevania, if that makes sense. But you can also pick up golden bricks for extra scoring. You can find these in crates. And one of the other things, you can also enter like small shacks that have the door open, and you can break up other crates and find other hidden goodies. But the bad thing about this picking up items mechanic is that if you get hit, you lose the current thing you are carrying. I think it's like a common trope to the Indiana Jones series that he loses his gun and all and whatnot. But it's kind of funny, like the first thing you do if you get hit, he loses his legendary whip. And that's, I don't know, maybe they didn't think about this, but whatever, I guess. So you can take an extra hit, otherwise you die in one hit. If you have the hat, that is possible. Or later in the game you carry like a gas mask, it's the same principle. You can stack those gas masks or hats on top of each other. And if you have an extra like hat or gas mask, you get an extra life. So that's good to know. I didn't know this during my first playthrough. So during the first level, there are also it's kind of a homage to the movies, I guess. You can push down a boulder down a slope, and you will crush the enemies underneath it. If you're fast enough, you can actually jump on top of the boulder too. And there are some mechanics that I didn't really understand. So young Indiana Jones can obviously not swim, because that's an inherent problem with video game characters. But you can, however, just like in Super Mario Bros. 3, you can like tap the A button to get out of the water. But if you don't tap the button, you will obviously drown. And one of the things I forgot to talk about in the previous section was if you lose all your weapons, you are down to your fists. And your fists don't have that much of a range, and the enemies shoot a lot projectiles at you. So there's a good mechanic. You can actually duck from the bullets if you're fast enough, but when you are like throwing punches, you always want to be in close quarters combat. But it's hard to get up on enemies, and some enemies are on horses, other are in gun turrets, which I'll talk about just in a bit. But this game is really unforgiving and really hard. So later in the game, or just the same stage actually, you pick up dynamite, and that's actually good to deal with one of those guys in like the towers or turrets that I talked about. And the first boss of this game, the Pancho General Villa guy, he's in one of those gun turrets, and you need to like take him out obviously. And first I thought there was something wrong with his sprite, because he's in black and white. Like if you draw on like a blank piece of paper, that kind of graphic, I was like, okay. But my point is, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that he's really hard, and I couldn't for the life of me pass him. I don't like to use save states, because I like to play games how they were meant to be played, but this boss demanded me abusing the save state feature, and as I said, I don't like that. So after beating the revolutionary, you free the lady, and you're off to Egypt. And you're going to Egypt to get an item called a jackal from a guy called a Claw. And I don't know exactly, but I think this game is based on the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles series. And I haven't watched that, but I think there's some elements drawn into the game, I'm guessing actually. So this stage has a mechanic. It's like in a dark cave, and you need to have a torch lit at all times. But here again comes the problem with like having an item, and when you get hit, you drop it or lose it. So I think the torch is on a timer, if that makes sense. So if it will eventually run out, you can pick up torches along the way, but you want to have a torch to see where you're jumping, where you're going. So the boss of this stage is obviously the Claw. He's carrying the jackal like in a minecart, and you hit him a couple of times, and eventually you get out of the minecart and you can beat him down. That's pretty much the end of the stage. So the next level is set in Europe, or more precisely France. So young Indiana Jones decided to join the military, and he become this delivery errand, and he needs to deliver a message to the front lines. And I think this is set in the First World War, because the German troops have like a spike on their helmet, like one spike. So the first level consists of enemy planes dive bombing you, and soldiers and tanks and all this kind of crazy stuff, going at you. It's full war. And this is where the hat is replaced with the gas mask. So as I said before, if you have an extra gas mask, it gives you an extra life. It's stacked on the top of each other. And as I said before, it's kind of hilarious. Imagining young Indiana Jones with 10 gas masks on his face. I don't know. I'm stupid that way. I find it funny. And also a cool thing, you can actually ride like a motorcycle through the stage with some tricky like mechanics, going over bumps and whatnot. And the boss of this stage is a huge tank. So the next stage is set on a waterfall, so it's like a lot of vertical climbing and platforming. And the boss here is a big tank train. I think you call it like the Big Bertha, and it's like a grenade lobbing boss fight. So the next stage takes place in Germany, and it's actually a train ride. So you fight guys on top of a train, like train cart, which is kind of cool. And the boss of this level was kind of funny. He just throws boxes, and it has like these few frames of animation, which just looks stupid. And after the fight, you are picked up on this running train, by the way, by a guy in a plane with like a rope ladder, and the game turns into a side-scrolling shooter with planes, blimps, and that's kind of cool actually. And the boss of this stage is the Red Baron, and I know it's like a red plane and whatnot. It's like a reference to another character, but the only thing in my head at this time was like Red Baron's Pizza, because it wasn't too long time ago I watched a YouTube video with, I think it was LGR, when he like found like a coupon for like a Red Baron pizza from like the 90s or whatever, and it still was valid at like Walmart. I don't know, that popped in my head like Red Baron, that's pizza, right? Not planes? Wait, what? And finally, the last stretch of the game is like a real gauntlet. So on the way to the High Command in Germany, there are a lot of bazooka-wielding enemies, like in a warehouse, and the torch mechanic returns, but this time it's literally just a flashlight. And you have to pass through like barriers. I don't know if it's like electrical barriers or lasers, but they're super loud, so you have to time that just right. You can also, like, if you punch a tank, that sounds kind of weird, but if you damage a tank well enough on this stage, you can actually ride the tank. You can shoot enemies with it. And the boss of this stage is a guy in a tank. So on the last stage, you actually need to plant a bomb, and there's like a set timer. I don't think the timer is actually displayed on screen, but you have like a couple of minutes to escape. And the boss, or the final boss, is like a disco ball, if that makes sense, that shoots a lot of stuff at you. You have to avoid it and damage it so you can escape. And the game cuts to like a cutscene at the end where old Indiana Jones actually finished the story. So gameplay. Follow young Indiana Jones through his adventures from Mexico, Egypt to Germany, and while he's beating up the bad guys, I guess. Control, the A button jumps, the B button uses your fists, weapons, or whatever weapon you're equipped at the time. The D-pad moves the character around, and the start button pauses. Graphics. The one thing about this game that I really like is the graphics, because they're really detailed, and I like the small little details in the sprites. It has a limited color palette, but I think it's in its favor, because it's one of those early games that, just as any other NES game from this era, it doesn't need a lot of color to display what it actually need to portray, if that makes sense. Sound and music. Yasushi Suzuki made the music for this game, and it's kind of forgettable. I can't hum a single tune from this game, but it was in the background, it was there, it didn't leave a lot of imprint. So in conclusion, I wrote, yes, try it, but it's super hard, and that more or less summarized the game. It is one of those games that is really hard. You can only take one hit unless you have an extra gas mask or an extra hat on your person. And also when you get hit, you lose your current item that you're carrying. So losing the legendary whip right at the start of the game, I don't think they thought about that, but it's a good game for what it is, actually. I was a bit frustrated with the difficulty, but it's one of those games when you play, you get a little further each time, and it feels rewarding. I had a lot of trouble with the first boss, but it's a good thing that nowadays you have like save stage and whatnot, because otherwise this would have been super hard. I can't imagine people beating this. I mean, I've seen a lot of plays on YouTube how people actually plays, and it's kind of scary because it feels like a robot is actually playing, if that makes sense. On the negative end, I don't think I can recommend this game to anyone. Maybe for like a person like I talked about before, like That Family Games, Paul, he does this thing called retro achievements. So he has to beat the game with some various conditions, like kill set enemies, clear the game in a couple of times, and he earns reward for doing it. I can recommend this game for a person that does these kind of challenges. But for a normal casual player, I don't think so. I didn't even know this game existed until I saw Paul playing it. So I actually want to thank Paul for introducing me to this game, because even though it was frustrating, it has this rewarding points and parts. And yeah, I mean, if I weren't doing these podcasts, I wouldn't be playing like half of these games even. It turns out playing a game a week is actually a good, fun experience. It has its good part and it has its bad part, and I like doing it. So yeah, thank you, Paul. So anyway, thank you for listening and or watching, and take care.